You're not getting stronger. You're just learning to lose less. Too late to realize where you've already lost everything. This is the first truth that most people never face. The problem isn't a lack of effort, but the silent waste of it. You discipline yourself, try to evolve, accumulate habits, seek control, and yet something slips away, something fails, something prevents any construction from truly lasting. Have you ever wondered why? Niccolò Machiavelli would have observed this with surgical precision. He wouldn't see a man as weak for lack of trying. He would see a man as weak because he doesn't know how to preserve what he produces, because he doesn't recognize the points where his own strength dissolves before it can consolidate. You try to grow, but you grow on leaks. Imagine a bucket. You pour time, energy, focus, and intention into it. You work harder, try harder, persevere more. But at the end of the day, it's empty again. Not because you didn't put in enough, but because you never noticed the holes. And the most awkward question isn't, how much are you making? The question is, how much of this is slipping away without you even realizing it? Machiavelli understood something that few accept. Power is not merely conquered, it is preserved. And almost always, it is lost before it is even realized. Not through direct attacks, but through small concessions, seemingly harmless habits, socially accepted but fatally destructive behaviors. You don't lose power at big events. You lose out on repeated details. Every time you give in unnecessarily, every time he talks more than he should, every time he exposes himself when he should be observing, every time he seeks approval when he should be deciding. And here's the point that changes everything. You were trained to add when you should be eliminating. From an early age, they taught you that evolution is accumulation. More knowledge, more discipline, more connections, more productivity. But no one taught you to remove what weakens you. No one taught you that holding on to certain things can be more destructive than having nothing at all. Machiavelli didn't believe in naive growth. He believed in strategic lucidity, in looking at one's own structure and asking, what here makes me vulnerable? And that question requires courage, because the answer is almost never comfortable. You may be carrying relationships that drain your clarity. You may be enduring behaviors that undermine your authority. You may be maintaining patterns that seem normal, but that make you predictable, manipulable, replaceable. And then an inevitable concern arises. What if you don't need to do it anymore, but stop doing certain things? This is where most people fail, because eliminating requires a decision, and the decision requires a break, and rupture almost always generates discomfort. Therefore, the mind looks for shortcuts. It prefers to add something new rather than abandon the old. It prefers to try to improve what is weak rather than remove what is already compromised. It prefers to remain busy rather than be precise. But Machiavelli would see this as weakness disguised as effort. He knew that holding on to what weakens you is a choice, and that every choice has a cost. Not eliminating what drains you is, in practice, accepting to remain vulnerable. Now look around you. How many people are busy but not making progress? How many seem disciplined but fail to become relevant? How many accumulate knowledge yet remain absent? It's not a lack of ability, it's excessive leakage. And there is something even more dangerous happening, something that Machiavelli would consider strategic naivete. People announce their changes. They say they will evolve. They declare what they are going to cut. They reveal their intentions before carrying them out. But why would someone reveal their move before actually carrying it out? When you advertise, you give time to the world, time to be questioned, time to be tested, time to be interrupted, and the world is not neutral. There are those who benefit from its current version. There are those who cannot tolerate its potential evolution. There are those who, without even realizing it, will try to pull you back to the point where you were predictable. Machiavelli understood this clearly. The mistake is not just in being weak. It's in letting others know that you are trying to stop being weak. Every exposed change becomes a source of resistance. Every revealed intention becomes a target. Therefore, true power does not announce itself. It is built out of sight, no speech. Without justification, no approval required. You don't need anyone to know. In fact, the less they know, the better. Because by the time they realize it, there's nothing left to stop them. And then the question arises that begins to reorganize everything. What exactly do you need to eliminate that you're still pretending not to see? These are not 10 obvious things. There are 10 silent leaks, 10 patterns that seem normal, but drain your strength daily. And And the first one is so common, so accepted, so automatic, that you probably never questioned it. But it is precisely there that his loss of position begins. Because a man begins to weaken the moment he feels the need to explain himself to someone who never had authority over him. And that's where the real game begins. Have you ever noticed how everything changes the moment someone asks you, "Why did you do that?" It's a simple question, almost innocent. But at that moment, something happens inside you. A subtle pressure, a need to answer, to explain, to justify. And without realizing it, you give in. You organize your arguments, try to be coherent, try to appear logical, try to be accepted. While speaking, you believe you are defending yourself, being clear, being mature. But if you look at it objectively, you'll see a reversal happening. You stopped being the one who decided and became the one who needs to validate the decision. Machiavelli would see that immediately. He wouldn't see an ordinary conversation. He would see a change of position, a shift in power. Because the moment you over-explain is the moment you allow the other person to evaluate your reasons. And whoever evaluates your reasons, even silently, assumes the role of judge. And you, without even realizing it, have taken on the role of the defendant. Think about common situations. You decide not to go to an event. Someone asks why. You could just say, "I'm not going." But no, you start explaining. You're tired. You have other things to do. You're not in the mood. You need to rest. And the more you talk, the more room you open for questions. But you will always, it's just this once. It costs nothing. Suddenly, you're defending a decision that's already been made. Now imagine the same scenario in a different way. You calmly reply, "I'm not going today." Silence. Without justification, without openness, without an invitation to negotiate, the discomfort arises. Not in you, but in the other person, because he has nowhere else to go. Machiavelli understood that power often lies not in what is said, but in what one refuses to explain. And there's something almost unsettling about that. When you stop explaining, people sense it, even if they don't know exactly what has changed. At first, they will insist. They will test you. They will try to recover the previous version of you, the one that justified itself, that adapted, that needed to be understood. But when they find only quiet firmness, param, not because they agree, but because they no longer have access. And it is at this point that something silent begins to form. Respect. Not the declared, polite, superficial respect, but that instinctive respect that comes when someone realizes they can no longer lead you with ease. Now observe another scene. Your cell phone vibrates. A message, you see, and he responds immediately. Another one arrives. You answer as well. Invitation, call, request, question, conversation. Everything gets a quick, readily available, immediate response. At first, this seems like education. After that, it seems normal. And then, it becomes expected. And what is expected ceases to be valued. Machiavelli knew that what is always accessible loses density. It loses weight. It loses importance. Because it requires no effort. And that which requires no effort is rarely respected. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to take up more space even though they speak less? How their time seems more valuable, even without them saying so. They don't explain. They are not in a hurry. They are not always available. And that's why they are sought after. Meanwhile, those who are always there, always ready, always accessible, begin to be taken for granted, and everything that is guaranteed is neglected. Now think honestly. How many times have you interrupted something important to answer someone who could have waited? How many times have I said yes, just to avoid seeming distant? How many times did you make yourself available when you shouldn't have? And the strangest thing is that nobody explicitly asked you to do that. You did, out of habit, due to conditioning, out of a silent need to stay connected. Machiavelli would understand this pattern as a failure to manage one's own value. Because excessive availability is not kindness. It's an exhibition. You give away your time as if it were infinite, give your attention as if it were free. He presents his presence as if it were weightless. But all of that is true. And when you start to reduce it, something curious happens. You take a little longer to respond. You decline an invitation without explaining. You don't always show up. And then, a subtle change takes hold. People are starting to interpret. He must be busy. He needs to be focused. He must be dealing with important things. You didn't say any of that, but the absence spoke for you. And here's the point that few people realize. People don't value what you say about yourself. They value what they need to conclude about you. Machiavelli knew this. He knew that the perception constructed in the minds of others is more powerful than any direct statement. If you say it's important, it sounds like a gimmick. If you behave like someone who is selective, the world concludes. And conclusions are more powerful than speeches. There is now a silent tension building. You don't explain yourself anymore. You are not always available, and that completely changes how you are perceived. But there is an even greater, deeper, more dangerous risk. Because even someone who can't explain themselves, even someone who is unavailable, it can still be completely controlled. All it takes is for it to reveal without realizing it what it feels. And when that happens, everything else loses value. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how much you protect yourself on the outside, whether the inside still delivers exactly where it can be hit. You believe you control what you feel, but in practice, the world controls what you show. A phrase, a glance, a tiny gesture, and your face reacts before your mind can organize any defense. A comment cuts through you and, without realizing it, your eyes betray irritation. A subtle criticism touches your pride, and your posture changes. An unexpected compliment appears, and you expose yourself more than necessary. Everything happens too fast, too automatically. Machiavelli wouldn't see this as emotion. He would see it as exposure. Because the moment someone identifies what motivates you, what affects you, or what destabilizes you, that person no longer needs to guess. They learn. And whoever learns how you function also learns how to guide you. Now think about it calmly. How many times has someone provoked a reaction from you just to see what would happen next? And how many times have you given that person exactly what they needed to see? The mistake isn't in feeling, it's in revealing it without choice. It's in allowing the world to read you like an open book while you still believe you're in control of your own narrative. Machiavelli understood that emotional predictability is not sincerity, it's strategic vulnerability. Not because feeling is weakness, but because demonstrating emotion without filter transforms any emotion into a tool for the observer. Consider a common situation. Someone interrupts you disrespectfully. You react immediately. Your tone rises, your gaze hardens. Your energy shifts. It seems like a legitimate response. But for the person on the other end, something far more important has happened. Now they know exactly what throws you off balance. Next time, he won't act haphazardly. He'll act with precision. And the most unsettling thing is, you'll react again, believing you're just being yourself. So the inevitable question arises. Are you reacting or are you being led? Machiavelli would never rely on automatic reactions to maintain his position. He would pause, not out of coldness, but out of mastery, because between stimulus and response there is a space, and it is in that space that power decides whether it remains or dissolves. Controlling your reaction doesn't mean denying what you feel. It means choosing what you reveal. It means deciding the moment, the intensity, the form. It means interrupting the automatic reflex and replacing it with intention. And when that starts to happen, something curious emerges. People stop understanding you easily. They provoke and don't get the expected response. They test and find silence. They observe and cannot decipher it. And when they can't figure it out, they lose control. But this is just the beginning. There is another, more subtle, more socially accepted, and often even praised leak. The habit of offering help, ideas, and solutions as if it were cost-free. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone presents a problem, and you immediately jump in with solutions? You suggest paths, organize strategies, offer insight, structure your thinking. At that moment it seems natural, it seems useful, it even seems intelligent. But watch what happens next. The person listens, perhaps thanks them, and moves on. Sometimes he implements his idea, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes things get better, and you're not even remembered, and you keep delivering. Machiavelli would never treat intelligence as a disposable resource. He knew that every analysis, every solution, every accurate reading of reality carries value, and value, when distributed indiscriminately, loses its power. Now the question arises, how many times have you solved problems that weren't yours, while your own problems continued to wait? The problem isn't helping. The problem is not choosing when, how, and for whom. When you offer your best unfiltered thoughts, you create a pattern. People start to expect it, to turn to you, to depend on you, and little by little you become a point of support, not of authority. And this changes your position without you even realizing it, because those who consistently deliver are rarely seen as exceptional, and that which is not rare is rarely valued. But perhaps the hardest leak to deal with isn't in what you say or what you show, it's in who you keep close. There are relationships that don't attack you. They don't directly sabotage you. They don't visibly harm you. They just keep you in the same place. Conversations that add nothing, presences that do not challenge, bonds that exist simply because they have always existed. And that's exactly why they're dangerous. Machiavelli would be suspicious of these relationships, not because all closeness is bad, but because any indiscriminate permanence weakens the structure. Now stop and think. Do the people you meet frequently bring you closer to who you want to become? Or do they just keep you comfortable with who you already are? Comfort is silent. It doesn't confront. It doesn't demand. It doesn't bother. But it doesn't elevate either. And the most treacherous thing is, it seems harmless. You laugh, you talk, you pass the time, and you leave the same, or a little more distracted, a little slower, a little more distant from what you could be building. And this doesn't happen just once. It happens repeatedly. Machiavelli would understand this as a loss of position due to continuous attrition. It's not a coup, it's erosion. You don't need to break up dramatically. You don't need to explain, justify, or declare anything. You just reduce it. Less presence, less initiative, less involvement, and that which has no depth dissolves on its own. But here's one last concern within this section. If you control what you show, choose what you deliver, and redefine who stays, why are there still moments when you seem to lose strength in the face of others? What else is escaping our attention? Because even the most reserved, selective, and conscious person can still convey something that diminishes their presence without realizing it, and that something isn't in what you say, not even in what you feel, nor in those around him. It's in how you allow the world to see your effort, and that completely changes the game. There comes a specific moment when the world starts measuring you, and almost no one notices when that happens. It's not when you speak, it's not when you decide, it's when you show how hard you're fighting. Have you ever seen someone post about sleepless nights, overwork, constant exhaustion, extreme effort, and for some reason, it doesn't generate real admiration? At most, it generates quick comments, empty reactions, a superficial validation that disappears the next day. Now consider the opposite. That person who doesn't talk much, who doesn't explain the process, who doesn't show difficulty, but suddenly appears with concrete results, visible progress, clear changes, and something happens inside the observer. Surprise, curiosity, and in many cases, respect. Machiavelli would understand this phenomenon without difficulty. For him, the world does not respond to effort. It responds to the appearance of dominance. And dominance is not announced. It reveals itself. There's an almost invisible detail in all of this. When you overemphasize your effort, you alter how others perceive your position. Instead of someone who controls the process, you start to look like someone who is just trying to survive it. And that changes everything. In competitive environments, for example, there's a curious pattern. People who constantly verbalize how overwhelmed they are end up being seen as less prepared to handle pressure. Not because they are actually weaker, but because they communicated their fragility before even showing results. And the most surprising thing is that often these same people work harder than everyone around them. But what reaches others is not the work itself, it's the image of the effort. Now observe something even more subtle. In negotiations, meetings, or professional settings, those who demonstrate emotional exhaustion or excessive effort tend to lose ground without realizing it. Behavioral studies show that people who appear to perform tasks easily are considered more trustworthy, even when the actual level of effort is unknown. In other words, the world doesn't reward those who fight the hardest. It rewards those who seem not to need to fight as hard. Does that sound unfair? Perhaps. But Machiavelli was never guided by justice. He was guided by functionality. And the mechanism is simple. Appearance shapes perception, and perception defines position. You don't need to stop trying. You need to stop showing off your effort as if it were proof of worth. Because in practice, this produces the opposite effect. Now imagine a typical scene. You meet someone and say, "I'm exhausted. I'm running around too much, I'm working nonstop. The person listens, maybe even agrees, but internally they register something different. You're overwhelmed, you're at your limit, you're trying to sustain something you may not be able to handle. Now imagine another approach. You say nothing. He continues working, adjusting, building, in silence. And then, weeks later, he shows up with something ready. The impact is different. There is no narrative of effort. There is evidence of results. And this creates a kind of force that doesn't need to be explained. But there is a second leak that is even quieter, more common, and more socially accepted: complaining. Have you noticed how complaining has become almost a collective language? People connect by complaining. They complain about the job, the routine, the people, the conditions, the difficulties. And curiously, this creates a momentary feeling of belonging. It's as if, by sharing your dissatisfaction, you are welcomed. But there's a hidden cost to that. Machiavelli would see complaining as an involuntary declaration of powerlessness. It doesn't matter if the situation is unfair. It doesn't matter if the problem is real. The act of complaining communicates one thing: you are not in control, and the world reacts to that. In social settings, those who constantly complain tend to be seen as having problems. In professional environments, they give the impression of needing to be managed. In more strategic contexts, they become an easy target for those seeking an advantage. Because complaining doesn't solve anything. Repeatedly revealing vulnerability only puts you at a disadvantage. Now think of something curious. How many times have you seen someone who never complains? It doesn't mean that this person doesn't have problems. It just means that they don't make public their issues. And this generates an almost automatic effect. It seems more stable, firmer, harder to shake. And what's most interesting is that, often, this perception comes even before any concrete proof. Because silence, in this case, constructs an image. Machiavelli knew that the way you present yourself in the face of difficulties determines how you will be treated within them. Complaining might provide temporary relief, but it also tells the world exactly where you are failing to sustain yourself, and this has consequences. Now imagine two people facing the same difficult situation. She talks about it all the time. She exposes it, repeats it, reinforces it. The other one says nothing. Just act, adjust, resolve, or move. Which of the two seems stronger? Which of the two seems more reliable? Which of the two would you choose to lead something important? The answer comes almost effortlessly, and that's precisely why this leak is so dangerous. It's socially accepted, even encouraged, but strategically destructive. You don't need to pretend that everything is perfect, but you need to decide what the world has access to, because each repeated word builds an image. And that image, over time, becomes their stance. Now, there is tension building. You start to hide the effort. Stop complaining. It becomes quieter. And yet, something may still allow others to get ahead of you. Something that doesn't depend on what you say, nor from what you show, but it depends on how much you uphold what you define. Because the moment your limits begin to give way, everything else loses consistency. And that's exactly where the next rupture happens. There's a quiet moment when people figure out if you can be bent over. And almost always, this moment isn't dramatic. It's not a big decision. It's not a direct confrontation. It's something small. A simple request, a gentle boundary, a discreet insistence. You say no, the other person insists. You hesitate, and then it gives in. It seems irrelevant. It seems polite. It even seems reasonable. But at that moment, something bigger happened. It wasn't just a concession. It was a sign. A pattern has been revealed. Machiavelli would understand this coldly. You taught the other person that your boundaries are negotiable. And from that moment on, it doesn't matter what you say. What matters is what you demonstrated. Because the world doesn't respect words. It respects consistency. Now observe how this repeats itself in everyday life. You set a schedule and agree to change it. Set a price and then lower it. Set a condition and then make it flexible. Always with plausible justifications. Always with reasonable arguments. But each adjustment conveys the same message. Pressing it works. And whoever learns this never forgets it. Next time, the pressure comes sooner. Then it comes back stronger. And little by little, you start losing ground without realizing it. Not because someone took it from you, but because you delivered it in small parts. And here's the most uncomfortable part. Often you know this. You know you shouldn't give in. You know that's not aligned. You know you're going against what you decided. But still, it gives in. Why? Because there is an invisible conflict happening. On one hand, there is the desire to maintain one's position. On the other hand, there's the fear of creating friction. And in this conflict, most choose to avoid immediate discomfort, even if it costs them authority in the long run. Machiavelli would not have chosen that way. He knew that all authority needs to be sustained under pressure, because it is under pressure that it is tested, and if it fails the test, it ceases to exist. Now imagine a different scene. You set a limit. Someone is putting pressure on them. You don't explain. No negotiation. Don't back down. The person insists. You stay. Silence. And then something happens. Persistence loses its power, not because the other person agreed, but because it found a point where there is no movement. And that completely changes the dynamic. Because boundaries aren't defined by what you say, they are defined by what you keep. And when someone realizes you're not moving, they stop trying to move you. But this requires something that few can maintain: firmness without needing to justify themselves. No defense. Without explanation. Without trying to convince. Just consistency. And that's exactly what transforms limits into something real. But there is another leak that is even more dangerous because it does not depend on external pressure. It depends on what you deliver, without realizing it. Have you ever shared something that wasn't ready yet? A plan, an idea, an intention, something that was still being built but that you felt like sharing, perhaps to hear an opinion, perhaps to feel validated, perhaps just to ease the mind. And after that, something changed. The power went down, the momentum weakened, the clarity dissipated, or worse, someone reacted in a way that made you doubt yourself. Machiavelli would never have ignored this type of mistake. For him, information is not just talk, it's a position, and every time you speak too soon, you give away an advantage. Because what hasn't happened yet is fragile. It hasn't been tested yet. It hasn't been finalized yet. He can't defend himself yet. And when exposed too early, it can be distorted, discredited, or neutralized. Now think of something even more unsettling. Not everyone who listens to you is rooting for you. Some just watch. Others compare. Some even use what you said before you did, and you don't even realize it. Because in his mind, it was just a conversation. But in the actual game, it was an exhibition. And here's the twist that few people see. The more you talk about what you intend to do, the less impact it will have when you do it. Because the element of surprise disappears. And unsurprisingly, there is no advantage. Now imagine the opposite. You don't count. It doesn't explain. Don't share. It doesn't anticipate. You just run it. And when the results come in, nobody was prepared. The reaction is different, stronger, more intense, more respectful, because nobody saw it coming. Machiavelli knew this. He knew that power also lies in the timing of information, in the exact moment when something is revealed. Speaking too early is like showing your cards before the game has even started, and whoever does that loses before even playing. But now there is increasing tension. You don't give in easily anymore. You don't reveal your plans. You uphold your boundaries. And yet, something can still weaken all of this. Something that is not in your external actions, not even in their visible decisions. Something deeper, quieter, harder to notice, because it's not the world that demands that of you. And it's an internal need. A need that, if left unchecked, will continue to sabotage everything you build, even if no one sees it. And that's exactly where everything connects. Because there is a single leak capable of reopening all the others. Even after you have sealed each one of them, there comes a point in life when you realize it wasn't a lack of ability. It wasn't a lack of discipline. It wasn't a lack of opportunity. It was a lack of cutting. Tried to grow by carrying everything with you. People, habits, patterns, reactions, explanations, excesses. You tried to evolve without letting go of anything. And now you understand, perhaps for the first time clearly, that power isn't built by accumulating, it's built by taking away. Machiavelli would have called this lucidity. Not a comfortable lucidity, but a necessary lucidity. One that doesn't protect your ego, but protects your position. Because in the end, it's not the world that limits you. These are the concessions you haven't yet had the courage to break. And there's a hard truth here. As long as you need someone to approve your decisions, you'll keep creating small cracks in everything you're trying to hold together. You explain yourself in order to be understood. You make yourself available to be accepted. You show too much just to be recognized. You give too much to be valued. And without realizing it, she constructs a version of herself that constantly depends on the gaze of others to exist. But this version will never be stable, because any power that depends on external approval can be taken away the moment that approval disappears. Now imagine another way of living. You decide and you stand by it. You choose and you keep it. You act and are held accountable for it without needing to explain. At first, this seems strange, uncomfortable even, because you've been conditioned to seek validation. But little by little, something changes. You stop negotiating with yourself. Stop adjusting your decisions to please others. Stop fragmenting yourself to fit other people's expectations. And then something rare emerges: internal consistency. Machiavelli would understand this as the true beginning of autonomy, the moment when you stop reacting to the environment and start structuring your own position within it. And when that happens, all the other leaks start to disappear. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You don't need to be available all the time. Don't react impulsively. It doesn't deliver value without criteria. Don't maintain relationships that weaken you. It does not present effort as a request for recognition. Don't complain to relieve frustration. It does not compromise on what it has decided to uphold. Don't reveal your plans ahead of time, because the root was cut. And when the root dries up, the rest cannot hold on. Now everything is starting to make sense. The 10 eliminations are not just isolated actions. They are a purification process, an internal adjustment that completely reorganizes how you position yourself in the world. And this process doesn't need an announcement. In fact, the quieter it is, the more effective it will be. You don't need to let anyone know you've changed. You don't need to explain what you're doing. You don't need to convince anyone. You just execute. Start simple. Choose a leak, just one. Perhaps it's time to stop explaining. Perhaps it's about responding less. Perhaps it's about maintaining a boundary without giving in. Perhaps it's about not telling someone something you would normally tell them, and do it quietly, without speaking, without posting, without seeking validation. Just do it. Next, choose the next one, and then the next one. And when you realize it, something will have changed. Not visibly at first, but in a structural way. You start to feel more in control, more clarity, more stability, and the people around her start to notice. They won't be able to explain it, but they'll notice that you don't react like you used to, that you're not very accessible, that you don't expose yourself in the same way. Something is different, and this generates a silent effect. More respect, more caution. Pay closer attention to your behavior, not because you asked, but because you've become someone more difficult to read, to reach, and to influence. And that is power. Not noisy power, not the power displayed, but the power remains. The one that doesn't depend on the moment, not even an opinion, not even the approval. Machiavelli would never ask you to be perfect, but it would require you to be aware of what he, she possesses, what it delivers, that which it allows, what sustains it. Because in the end, it all comes down to this. Either you control what comes in and what goes out of your life, or the world will do it for you. And when the world acts, it's almost never in your favor. Now the decision is yours. You can keep adding things, trying to compensate, trying to adjust, while it continues to leak from the inside. Or you can start removing it, silently, with precision. No need for applause. And one day when they look at you and wonder what happened, you will know the answer. Nothing was added. Everything that weakened us was eliminated. If this content resonated with you, if at any point you recognized yourself in it, then there is already something within you ready to change. Now tell me, even if it's anonymously, are you ready to eliminate what weakens you? Comment below. I want to know who really understood. And if you want to continue developing this type of mindset with direct, strategic, and transformative content, like the video and subscribe to the channel, because the next step could further change how you view power.